Okay, today we're back with Laura Brand, our criminologist and serial killer whisperer. And today she's brought some interesting recordings with her mentor, Mr. Allan Pass, Dr. Allan Pass, I should say, who has kind of guided her through all of these serial killer interviews that she's been doing and extractions. And he's her go-to as far as overall trying to figure out and a mentor to her. So Laura, tell us a little bit about, again, just give us a brief description how you met Allan. I know it's been a while since we've had him on the podcast, and what he means to you as far as the work you do.
Yeah, so I met Allan at the Hunting for Hunters conference, which was a conference about serial killers and analyzing them and how to hunt them law enforcement wise. And we just connected there, and we've been in touch ever since. He's a behavioral consultant, behavioral expert. And what you're about to hear today is the tapes of Allan and I prepping for to go in to see Bittaker on his deathbed.
And what year was this?
This would have been 2019.
Wow. So give us just before we listen to it, just kind of give us a little brief description of what you guys talked about, because we have several, we have like a few recordings that we're going to be going over on, but just like when you were going into this and you met him and you were kind of going in cold, what was he generally advising you? And we'll hear more in his words, but I just want to give the audience an idea, like overview.
Okay. Yeah, so this was, Bittaker is on his deathbed, and he's interviewed many serial killers on their deathbed. So this is our conversation of when I'm about to fly out there, and we pretty much, break down Bittaker psychologically. So we dive into his childhood, early life, and then his, the behaviors from his crimes, and we're kind of digging through, Bittaker's psyche in all these calls.
Cool. All right. Well, let's listen to this first one.
Hello.
Morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Are you out and about, or are you still home?
I'm doing surveillance, so I have time.
that seems to be your principal occupation, is watching and observing. Did you ever think, Laura, that you may be developing a paraphilia?
Like stalking.
Voyeurism, right?
Yeah.
You'll probably end up in your free time finding yourself just sitting there staring and watching people.
That's what I do. I'm like a professional people watcher. That's all I do.
That's right. Oh, that's too funny. Thanks for sending the information, by the way. And tell me about your. You were a co-presenter then, I guess, at the Boston University. Yeah, how did it go?
It was really good. I was nervous, but everyone said I did really well, so I'm glad.
Yeah. Now that's not the first time that you presented, right?
No, that was my first time.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. How about that? Well, congratulations. How nice is that?
It was nerve-wracking because I'm sitting there and I'm presenting, and I didn't care about like the 100 people that were there, but it was like Anne was right there, and then Dr. Stone was right there, and I'm like looking at them, and I'm like, oh my god, like the everything in front of me.
Oh, that's too funny.
Yeah.
So you had some. You were presenting on your guy at San Quentin, right?
Yeah. So I was doing the Bittaker Norris case and just presenting pretty much the background of the crimes, and then I got into a little bit of the work that Bittaker and I have been doing about trying to find the bodies and that kind of stuff.
Right. So obviously the big question that people would ask, and I'm sure hoping someone asked this at the time of your presentation, is so why would Bittaker tell you anything? Why would he even tell you this stuff? And I remember asking you that question, and you gave me an answer that and I remember it well, but I'm curious, did anyone ask you the question about why would Bittaker talk with you about these things and about providing you with information about where bodies are?
What's funny is right before I got up to present, Dr. Stone and that guy, Gary, who's been working with him, they presented and they talked about Bittaker in their presentation. And it was funny because Stone goes, I've talked to Bittaker, we've corresponded, and he will not open up about the crimes. And I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. Because with me, he's so candid about everything. He goes right
Right.
there. And so I got up and I actually said, I was like, I'm not positive why he's giving me this information. I didn't go into the whole pregnancy story and that kind of stuff, but I said, I think it's, you build that trust for the 5 years in the rapport, and you just break them down pretty much.
Yeah.
Say it. Yeah. But it is. It's like he finally opened up.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm sure you've been watching some of the news releases on Little, now rated as the most prolific serial killer in the United States, in the history of the United States, out of Texas.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you've seen that the person who's primarily responsible for obtaining information on this is a Texas Ranger.
I saw that, yeah.
So you got to ask the question now: what do these folks? Why do these folks give up information to certain people when they won't give it up to others? So that's the question that I have in my mind all the time when I interview someone during what's called an interview/interrogation. And obviously the format of an interview and an interrogation are totally different. Interrogations are driven specifically by fact-finding associated with culpability. Their interviews are driven more for informational purposes about background and correlation of data, but they're not looking for admissions and or denial of responsibility to behavior. So your question that you had posed before in one of your texts to me is, or comments, was you were looking for an alternative strategy on how to approach Bittaker to get him to give more information to you.
Yeah.
So, I think about this all the time, and I think about what is it about certain approaches that get people to open up and other approaches don't? And I really do believe that the foundation of opening the door for collection of information in what feels like an interview but really is an interrogation is, in this particular case, I think is driven specifically by what the needs are of the individual. Let me explain. So in profiling, obviously the most important thing is to find out what are the needs that the perpetrator has that are driving the behavior that we see in the trace evidence left at the crime. So for instance, this is predicated upon the belief that any and all serial killers have lots of choices on how they terminate a victim. They can shoot them, they can poison.
It was strangulation, but it was, there was a lot of torture, and he put the ice pick through the victim's ears. That's what he's known for. But, really it was strangulation was the main one he used for, I think, almost all the victims. I think except for Andrea.
Okay. Did he use a garrote or did he use his hand?
He used his hands, and then they would also put coat hangers around the girls, too, and use pliers to tighten them.
Okay, so he would wrap a wire coat hanger around the female's neck and then use a pair of pliers to continue to tighten.
I don't want to get too graphic here.
It's just hard.
Yeah.
So just wanted to, how detailed do you guys get into that? Because I just don't want to play too much.
I don't think it's too much more detailed. He goes pretty much into the analysis right after that.
Yeah. All right. So we stopped for a little bit because it was a little graphic. Just want to make sure it's not getting any more graphic right now because I don't want to. All right. So let's go back to the recording and.
The knot.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that tells me that in the other strangulations he did by hand as well.
Yeah, he would actually, how he would do it was he would stand and then he would switch over to the coat hanger.
Mm-hmm. Probably once they lost consciousness.
Yeah.
Do you know whether or not the strangulations occurred from the front or from the rear of the victim?
The front, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, so he was looking at the victims while he was strangling them. Okay. The sexual, there was sexual assaults involved?
Yeah.
And did those occur, do you know, if the sexual assaults occurred before the victim was dead or after or both?
They all occurred before, but, in an interview, he did say to me, like, he did fondle the victims after death. He
Okay.
like dropped that little hint of not saying necrophilia, but he was like, yeah, I did fondle them once they were dead.
Okay. Okay. All right. So now I'm getting a little bit of a picture of what's motivating the guy. So you know a lot about his background, right?
Yeah.
All right. Now, the total number of victims that he has disclosed to you currently are, what was it, 5, I think, or 3? 5. Okay, it was 5. All females. Age range?
All teenagers.
All teenagers. Interesting. Similarities at all between the victims?
Some blonde hair, blue eyes, but there were a couple brunettes. But he always said they were targeting for like the blonde hair, blue eyes. Just like yeah.
Okay. So now let's talk about the critical relationship of his family of origin. Was he adopted or was he raised by his biological parents?
He was adopted by family members. So a distant aunt and uncle actually adopted him and raised him.
From birth?
I think he was like 2 when he was adopted.
Do we have any diagnostic workups when he was a young person that were authored before he was obviously arrested and convicted?
Yes, I have some psych reports from when he was a teenager. And what was it? He has passive-aggressive personality they put down for him.
Okay.
Yeah, passive-aggressive. And
that means he's very frustrated with life. Okay, and that's fitting in with what I'm hearing about his adoption issues. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then there was a lot of talk about the adoption from the 2 adoptive parents. It was weird. They were overprotective yet neglectful in court, which I thought was weird. But he always says they were very neglectful and they treated him like a tenant and not really, a son.
Right. So he never really felt loved and accepted by his adoptive family.
No.
And did he express any, during the course of your interviews, did he ever express his resentment for his mother giving him up at such a young age?
Yeah, he does. He does talk about it. Well, there was a report, the mother ended up going to New Mexico, getting remarried. She had 2 more girls, divorced that guy, got remarried again, had 2 more sons. So she kept 4 of the children. And I had said to Bittaker, you probably had a better life not being with your mother, because the report from the daughter was it was a very hard life. The mother was always drinking and out and never around. And he got really upset and he said, well, I would have been with my mother. So there's definitely something there with him wanting to be with the mother.
Yeah, so it's long-term resentment about being the throwaway child, and he was the throwaway. Okay. His mother was a blonde, I assume?
I asked him that if his mother was blonde. He said no. I've seen one picture of her. He said she was very pretty, but not blonde. The blonde, he says, comes from his first girlfriend. His first real girlfriend was blonde hair, blue eyes.
Who dumped him?
Yes.
Okay. And that would have been when he himself was around his mid to late teens?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Do we know whether or not his girlfriend had gotten pregnant and then got him?
What do you want to say?
Well, I think that part was what I was going to ask, was that since it was his teenage years, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you were, because to me, after all the stuff that you've told us and we've learned about Bittaker and read and listened to, it just sounded to me like he got stuck as a teenager.
He did. His EQ is stunted there, as well as Nora's.
So what was that inciting incident as a teenager? Do you know?
I don't know if I could pinpoint an exact placement. It could be this rejection. It can be something as simple as a rejection, a heartbreak that can, stunt somebody's EQ. It could be a really traumatic experience that neither one has ever spoken about. That could have also stunted it. There's a lot of different things that can stunt a person's EQ and get it stuck, especially in the teenage years.
Was he? I can't remember. You said, was he bullied?
Wasn't really bullied. He was a loner. The only thing he has really reported to me that was somewhat traumatic is the rejection from this girlfriend.
Do you think that because the rejection from his mother, that rejection from his girlfriend triggered that wound?
I was just going to say it could have definitely intensified it. Yeah.
Not that I have empathy for this person. I just want to make that very clear, because I do not have any empathy for Laurence Bittaker. I think he's a
monster.
Monster.
Right.
And what he did to these victims is
No, we're just looking at his behavioral psychology right now. And yes, I think it would definitely have triggered any type of, the past rejection with his mother. It would have intensified much more than it would have done so with a regular person, experiencing their first rejection, their first heartbreak. This would have been, huge for somebody who's had that past wounding, and it could have triggered that, to kind of stem back up. And this could have stunted his emotional intelligence. I can't say so for sure. I'm just, speculating, knowing what happened with his mother, this girlfriend, the victims being the same age, the blonde hair, blue eyes. It does all add up.
Did his mother have blonde hair, blue eyes?
No, she was very pretty. But she was like a light brunette from the photo I've seen from her.
So his mother rejected him and he went to live with family members. And I guess they told him this story about his mother. Like, how did he learn that his mother?
Yeah, the relatives told him, but he has some vague memories of her. He remembers her picking, like he's told me, she gave him this teddy bear and he slept with this teddy bear up until he was 16, another teenage years. He would never let go of his teddy bear that she had given to him. He remembers these purple flowers he would pick for her. She would pick for him as like a little boy. So he has like very vague toddler memories of his mother before she gave him up.
So moving forward, for other people to kind of prevent these kinds of things from happening, obviously there's certain cases where mothers can't take care of the child and they have to give them up, right? There's many cases of this. It's no one's fault. It just happens. So what can you do to make sure that the child's not wounded for life from those kinds of experiences, if you were to be the person to take on that child?
I think especially back then, that was in the 1940s. I don't think anybody was like checking in, with him or his Irish twin brother and to see if they were okay. Even when he's, in juvie and he's getting all these psyche valves done, there wasn't really a check in with the child. I think now, with the school shootings, what we have going on currently, I think there's a lot more check in with the children. We're not nowhere near where we need to be, with mental health with children at all. I'm just saying, I think those check-in points of, finding somebody the child is very comfortable with, doesn't even have to be, somebody in psychology. It could just be, somebody from a Boys and Girls Club. It could be a teacher, anybody the child feels safe with, just to do those check-ins and, make sure that the child's feeling okay. They feel safe. They don't feel neglected. Are they being abused? Those check-ins can change a child's life in the course of their life, which we're seeing right here, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, back in the 40s, I mean, even when I was growing up, in the 70s and 80s, kids were seen and not heard.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what they were taught.
You weren't allowed to talk.
Yeah.
In the 80s. I mean, even in the 80s. I mean,
Yeah.
we weren't, you don't question your parents,
No, they didn't really get into too much of your psyche back then unless you had some really violent issues.
Right.
It's just like if you're like with Bittaker, he wasn't really doing anything huge when he was a young kid or early teenager, correct? To make him noticeably
He almost killed somebody at 12.
Oh yeah. I
So
guess some, yeah.
Yeah.
So there is warning signs. Big warning.
Yeah, there were. Yeah.
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 Interesting. All right, let's see what else Allan has to say.
Abortion.
I've never asked him that. I don't think so. I don't believe it. No, I want to say no because I don't think they ever were sexually intimate. I think, because I asked him when he lost his virginity, and it was an older woman with like 4 kids, and it was his early 20s. He said he lost his virginity.
Did he tell you at all as it relates to his sexuality? Did he provide any, what he deemed to be credible reporting about his capacity to perform? In other words, did he indicate at all that he had some difficulties with sexual performance with women?
No, he actually brags about his sex drive, how good his sex drive is.
Okay, he makes a point of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so in a big, broad view perspective, we have a guy who very early memory recollections of being a throwaway child by his biological parent without resolution. So he doesn't really never resolve this. Yeah. And with his adoptive parents, his adoptive family, which are biologically related back to mom, he wasn't real happy with them either because he felt as though they were neglectful and treated him emotionally in a distant way. So he had difficulties with connectivity, emotional connectivity. I'm assuming also then that during the course of your interviews with him, even though he talked about his sexual prowess and his ability for sexual performance, that his ability to connect on a meaningful emotional level, he had some difficulties with that going forward after his first girlfriend. Yeah. Okay. So that relates back to his long-term feelings of being a throwaway child and abandoned by a significant relationship. And the fact that he's engaging in strangulation of young teenagers is he's going back, in my mind, and in my opinion, from just this information, he may be going back to when his mother, was a young teenager and had him, and obviously exercising his anger towards his mother. And the reason for the strangulation is obviously making sure that the death is slow and painful. And doing it in the front of the victims means that he can watch them at the same time. So his victims are a cross between his anger, his repressed anger for his mother and her abandonment of him as she is a teenager, and then also the rejection that he felt from his first meaningful relationship with his girlfriend, who was a blonde teenager who dumped him. So that's the reason for the sex. So he's not really having sex with his mother. He's having sex with his first significant relationship in a torturous way, in an angry way, not in a loving or affectionate way, obviously. So he's getting even with her. So he's getting even with two female figures at the same time. He's getting even with his mother, and he's getting even with his girlfriend who abandoned him as well.
I want to stop right there because we've talked a lot about this on other, like when we did Gary Ridgway, he had a very screwed up relationship with his mother, even though he wasn't abandoned, but he had a weird, strong sexual connection to his mother. I guess his mom dressed provocatively when he was younger. So I find it really interesting how Allan kind of deduces based upon what you're telling him and what he knows as being a scholar on this subject and how he breaks it down. Tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are about that, about the mother relationship.
Yeah, and he's right on point when it comes to this. And this is something you're going to hear or see if we start analyzing more and more serial killers. That mother relationship is going to come into play time and time again. Like you just said, I remember, working with Ridgway, the mother relationship. You see it come into every play. It's the most primal, relationship a child has, and especially with a little boy, that's their first female that they're encountering, and it can set up them for the rest of their life. And you're always going to see if there's a breakdown there with the mother relationship. There's usually a breakdown with the females later in their life. And usually with their interpersonal relationships, you'll start seeing it in their teenage years and early adult life as well. Usually it's hard for them to keep interpersonal relationships, romantic ones especially. There might be domestic violence, stuff like that. You're going to start to see pretty early, probably early 20s is when you're really going to start to see it.
Is there any kind of serial killers that kind of in the inverse of that they've had like screwed up relationships with their father and that happened, or is it the female serial killers who've had screwed up relationships with their fathers?
No, what's interesting is I've had ones with breakdowns with the fathers, and ironically, what I've noticed is their victims are males or a mix of male and female when there's a breakdown with the father. Yeah.
So the parental guidance in the nurturing at an early age into adolescence, is it a time where it's more prevalent? I mean, could they, let's just say they had a bad relationship with their mother when they were before puberty. Does it happen? Like, is there a certain point in their childhood that it really kind of kicks in?
It's all different. The sexual years, for the paraphilia years, 6 to 8 is like the years you really want to look at for like the sexual development. But then 1 through 5 is, those years, if there's any type of neglect, that could really set the child up for life. But then you have your, adolescent years, So it's almost like every single year is playing a different part in our personality and our makeup. And, it turns us into the people that we're going to turn into. Our personality doesn't start to develop or finish developing until 30s. So our early 30s, that's when like the core personality of who we are is really going to develop. But every year is going to set us up for, different aspects of that personality and what it's going to develop into. So it's hard to say like this one thing is going to develop into that, 'cause it's every year and every aspect of our personality that's multi-layered, is playing a part into what's going to come later.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, let's go back to Allan.
All right, so things are starting to set. So we need all this information to know that, because he's satisfying the needs. When he commits these events, he's exercising those psychological needs that he has, secondary to what he's bringing forward from his history. So how do we use those now to get him to talk more openly about where these bodies are? Well, first of all, quite frankly, when he has committed these other murders of other girls, he has done so with the same concept. My opinion is he's done so with the same concept that he's done with the others, because there's a consistent pattern here. So what we want to encourage him to talk about where the victims are, what you would want to do is play into what his needs were at the time that he was committing the event.
Okay, I guess we got to go to the other recording. So
Yeah.
I want to talk about, because he said that when we had him on the podcast, and he talks about the needs, and the killer's needs, the human needs, whatever the needs that he needs to fulfill. So let's talk a little bit about that, and what have you learned from him giving you that guidance as far as extracting information from these serial killers, as far as the needs. It seems to be like a base level thing that they all it's like a gateway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these guys are primal, so they're not doing anything that they don't want to do unless they want to do it, unless they have a need to do it. That's very typical for antisocial personality. And I'll use an example I'm not going to say his name, but you guys know who he is. I had called Allan when I was dealing with him during my last round at San Quentin, and I had said he's being very difficult. I'm trying to, just keep him calm. And he said, his need is that power and that control. And I called you guys because Allan said, take him shopping. Do you guys remember this? He said, take him to the grocery store, take him out shopping, let him pick out your nails, let him pick out something to eat. You're going to say, I'm going to cook tonight. What do you want? Like, what should I make? And I let him just kind of take the steering wheel. And even though he's in prison and I'm out there shopping, I gave him that power and that control. And the next day it was like a total switch. He was docile.
I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he became docile with you. It was like
very
he was in
docile.
control, as long as he knew he was
almost even. Yes. Yeah.
Say that part again. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Submissive. He even became submissive the next day. Yeah, afterwards, because I had fed into that need of that power, that control, or at least the illusion of creating it for him.
Yeah, you included him.
Right.
You included him on things that he would never be included on the inside.
Right.
He had some decision making to make. He can and he's almost like, from his prison cell, he got to be a little marionette of you. It's like he gets to, because it's all about controls, because you gave him the steering wheel.
I did. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yep.
I forgot about that.
Mm-hmm.
I did forget about that, but the context, it totally makes sense.
And it worked.
Yeah. When you have someone who has been so used to controlling the narrative and the situation, people, and determining whether or not they live or die. And because that's, that person you're talking about was someone who literally controlled these people, locked them up, and kept them for a while. So that's the fact that you use that technique and kind of helped open up the door. It's such a strange, it's like the mind is like, it's such a gateway of confusion sometimes, but it's these little tiny things like that, where you included him on just a shopping list, that kind of gave him the opportunity to really be open with you.
Yeah, because you got to think, especially in prison, I mean, they're in an environment where they have absolutely no control. So this is a person who you said, they had captives. They made every decision for them every single day of their lives. And they went from that to an environment where they have no control, where now they're the captive. So it was giving them back that semblance of control, or at least the illusion of the control that previous day before I had that interview, to make him docile, to get him submissive, more open, less combative, to opening up and sharing, those, an interview that would go smoothly with him. And it worked, just by giving that illusion. I always call it the illusion, because they're not really getting control. They're not out there with me. They're not actually shopping with me, but, just giving them the semblance of that illusion of control.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you do that with any other, the serial offenders?
I did try it out with some others that I thought, the ones who have that underlying need of that power and control. And it really does work.
Did it come up randomly, or is it something that you were out doing something, you were actually out shopping and he called you? Because I know these guys call you at all hours and you're like, you have a life. So I'm sure I see you taking these calls sometimes when you're doing other things, your daily life things that you have to do.
It was kind of funny how it all transpired, because I was on the phone with Allan. I was out just running errands, and he was like, what are you about to do? And I was like, go get my nails done. He was like, get him on the phone and ask him what kind of nails he likes, and then take him to you're going to get dinner tonight, right? Okay. You're going to go to the grocery store, have him on the phone there. You're going to go pick out an outfit or something, have him on the phone, let him pick out the shoes, the clothes, the dinner for tonight, your nails. And I was like, really? And he was like, just trust me. So I sent him a message. I said, call me. So he called me, and I was like, I'm getting my nails done. What nails should I get? He goes, pink, and which I never get done. And I was like, I guess I'm getting pink nails. And that's how it all, transpired for the rest of the day. And the next day I went in, he went from combative to literally submissive in the case. Yeah.
So you went physically in to see him after that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sure he wanted to see the pink nails. He wanted to see the fruits of his
Mhm.
suggestions.
Yep. Yeah.
But I guess that's the game you got to play.
It is.
It really is a mental game.
It's mental gymnastics. It really is.
It's the legendary Silence of the Lambs quid pro quo.
Yeah. That's the perfect example for it. Yeah.
Because that's what he was doing with her. That's what he was doing with Clarice. He would give her, like, she'd have to give something of herself. She had to tell him about her fucked up childhood.
Yeah.
So he could kind of get inside her brain.
That's what they want. They want to feel like they're close to you. They want to feel like they know something about you. They also want that, like, connection. All of them are starved for connection in every capacity. They've never had it from childhood. So it turns into a game of what you see, a quid pro quo with all of them. Really does.
Wow. Okay. Here's the other part of that interview.
I know on the Ledford tape when he audio recorded, the transcript, you can hear him saying, like, tell me you like it. Like, tell me, like, he has that script going with the victims that we heard from the audio tape.
Right.
I'm trying to think if he ever, like, hinted that towards me. He did say, like, he says multiple times, I said, why don't you blindfold them, or why don't you wear a mask, why did you have to kill them? And he goes, it wouldn't have been the same fantasy. It would have ruined the fantasy. I wanted them talking back with me. I wanted them interacting, and I wanted that. He wanted that script exactly as it played out. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And it would have minimized his satisfaction if they wouldn't have been able to talk, and it would have minimized his deep-seated psychological needs if they weren't able to see him.
It's very indicative to a lot of the other things that we know. I mean, Ridgway did the same thing.
So does he talk about Bittaker's deathbed stuff here?
I'm trying to remember what's right after that part. How much tape is left in that one?
This is like this is only a 5-minute one, and we're only like a minute 37 into it.
Go to like minute 3.
A what? Probably like towards the end.
Yeah. Fast forward to like the 3-minute mark.
Do again, as I said before, is connect those very sadistic needs of shaming, humiliating, and ultimately showing who's in control to the victims. Get him to talk about where these victims are and how he killed them. the easiest way, if you go at him from the front end and say, just tell me where you put the other bodies, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
It won't work. What will work, I really do believe this, my confidence level is very, very high about this. What will work with this guy is to get him to talk about the details. Pick one, whatever, number 6, number 7, whatever it is. Pick one that he's willing to talk about, and then get him to go into the details of what he did with her in graphic form, the whole time remembering in the back of your head, what we want to do here is we want him to exacerbate his anger, his frustration, and his ability to feel omnipotent and ultimately of control over life and death. And the fact that this victim deserved everything she got. And that's essentially the message you want to convey to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that will light him up like a fuse on a stick of dynamite. You're going to see, my prediction is you will see some emotional transitioning that will just astound you.
Really?
Because this man's going to come alive using this approach.
All right, so let's kind of unpack what he just said there. So tell us, I mean, from what I'm hearing is that he wants you to go in there and really kind of get the gory details on what he did, and like graphic details, and describe what he was doing, what he was feeling, when he was doing it. So it will trigger some sort of, like, he's almost like you're allowing him to brag about what he did.
Pretty much, essentially, yeah. If you
make him, and he feels safe bragging to you about that, does that open up another door to where a trust level? Because if he can tell you everything he did and how he was feeling it, and allow him just unfettered explanation of his brutal crime, and you just sitting there listening to her, not reacting or just taking it all in, does that mean that I have someone here that understands me and I feel safe? Maybe I'll tell her something else.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happens, is if you can sit there and just no emotion and just be that safe place for them to even feel comfortable enough, whether they want to brag, whether they want to boast, whether they want to laugh about it. If you're able to be that safe space, and I mean, that's an incredible level. It takes years to even get to that place where they would even feel comfortable enough to do that with you. Yeah, they'll just keep going. It's like a wind-up doll that just keeps going and going and going, and they'll just feel safe enough to keep going. With Bittaker, though, one of the things I don't think we got really into is we've both noticed, Allan and I, how detail-oriented Bittaker was. When he gets descriptive, he gets very detail-oriented. He harps on details. He wrote, lists out about everything that Bittaker Norris got wrong in the trial, everything he misstated. So Bittaker is very detail oriented in the way he speaks and the way he looks at things. So that was another thing that Allan and I were talking about and looking at is, how detail oriented Bittaker is and how that could be a way to open him up as well.
Did you think, did Allan ever talk about the fact that because you're a female, because you kind of look like his potential victim, that, that you would have the best chance at doing this, as opposed to see if Allan went in and did all that work? Because I think that's a big part of it, don't you?
Absolutely.
I don't. Only because, and this is what I say to everybody, Bittaker knew what I looked like from day one in 2014. And remember, he said, don't come visit me, don't come see me. My looks had nothing to do with it. It was just my persistence that finally broke him down and got me in there with him. So my looks did not get me through that door with him.
No, what I'm saying is,
right.
That didn't get you into the door. But when you were there and you were using these tactics, do you think a man with the same kind of pedigree that you have going in there would have been able to untap that?
I think somebody is skilled enough like Allan, for sure. I do think, however, most of the inmates, and I think just men in general, would respond better to a female. This is actually a study that we've actually talked about doing, is sending male versus female in there, only because women are more empathetic in nature. More just men and women are more likely to open up to a woman just because they're more understanding, they're more empathetic. there's more of like that safety with a woman as opposed to a man. Not that a man can't create that. I think, look at Allan, he does an amazing job at it, doing it with inmates. But like I said, I think just typically because of females' empathetic nature, they sometimes get a better response.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I would have thought, yeah, because because it's almost like they're prey. You're like like the epitome of their prey.
But I also think because she commands respect, because you do.
I was going to say, I don't think they see me as prey at all.
No.
Like they always say to me, they're like, you're like us. They see me more as a predator like them.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm saying. They see you.
Yeah.
You command respect with them. They
Yeah.
respect you. And that's what people need to understand, that independent of how Laura looks and she's attractive and she looks like they're victims, they do respond to her, I think, because she's been able to connect with them with this tactical empathy that she uses, where it's like, it's empathetic, but she's really doing it for a reason. It's not real like empathy. So
you've got to understand too, like when I walk into San Quentin's death row too, like I'm not like going in like a timid little prey. What I do is I walk over, suited up, the heels that make me, almost 6 feet tall. And I circle the cages and I circle them at least once or twice and looking, dead in the eye of every offender. That's just like when I first go in, I do it every single time. So I don't think I could see that being the predator prey thing, but I don't think that is with me. They're more looking at this as like a predator type of deal.
I didn't mean that you specifically are prey, but you represent you symbolize something that they've preyed on before.
Preyed upon before, right.
That's what I'm saying, because you look the part. When you describe Bittaker's, victims, you look at them. They're they're young ingenues. They're small, they're pretty, and they're innocent looking.
Yeah.
I think most people seeing you walking down the street wouldn't, like, if you told them what you did, they'd probably laugh at you.
Oh, they do. Yeah. Most people are like, there's no way there's no way you talk to serial killers. Yeah.
Exactly. Or not only just talk to them, that you confront them and you're sitting inches away from them.
Right.
Because anybody can get on the phone and talk to a serial killer, but you actually get in a cage, locked in a cage with them on, thousands of hours, and it's
locked in the cage. Yeah.
In the cage,
Yeah, it's true.
Even Clarice wasn't locked in the cage with Hannibal Lecter. She had bars between her.
Had those bars. I know.
I didn't want to go. I was like, I'm not going.
Yeah, she didn't go.
Yeah. They wouldn't give me the glass when I asked for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
He is going to come so much alive, Laura, because you are now tapping into his world, the way in which he sees his world of what these girls, what they really needed. And they needed to have this stuff done to them. Yeah. And once you get his emotionalism peaking up around that level, you'll be able to pick it up real quick. Don't be surprised. His breathing is going to change. His eyes are going to get dilated pupils. He's going to start taking in everything in his environment. The only thing that I would have to be concerned with is, are you in a position when you do these interviews to be safe?
I cut it there for a reason.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're just some methods there you didn't want recorded?
No, I just didn't want to whistle blow.
Right.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. So there's one more here. It's a short one.
And playing into his needs of being magical and all-powerful, which is what he had conveyed to me during the conversations that all preceded this, he talked about his dream. And in his dream, he saw all the details about how the murder was committed. And, of course, we had the district attorney sitting there at the time. And
he's talking about someone that he's another killer.
Yeah, he was talking about, I think there was another tape. Yeah, he's talking about how he got an offender to pretty much spill every detail by saying, why don't you go home, think about it, if you have a dream about it. And the next day, the offender was putty in his hands, talking about the dream with all the details of exactly how the murder occurred.
Okay, so he's using a parallel experience that he had to describe how to, okay.
Videotaping the interview. And it was at that time that he started answering very specific questions about information that only the killer could know because he saw it in his dream. Well, obviously, we know he didn't see it in his dream. So he could not connect the reality that what he was giving up was information that only the perpetrator could know. And that's when the district attorney said, well, you're under arrest for the murder of Betty Shea.
Yeah.
And then the rest was easy to do in terms of putting pressure on his brother and his sister and so forth and so on. But the primary focus here is the same as with Bittaker. You're looking at but minimizing the objectivity of the data recall and emphasizing the emotionalism of the motives behind the murders.
Yeah.
That's going to light him up. And once he gets lit up emotionally, his animation's going to change, as you've already seen it once. And he's going to take that emotionalism, and if you convey that how releasing the whereabouts of the victim will further humiliate and embarrass the victim as she deserves to be, he's going to feel justified in telling you where those bodies are.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what's very odd about him, too, is I've talked to him about being a psychopath, being a sociopath, and he doesn't, care when I use that word. Like, he doesn't.
Yeah, sure.
He's very like, yes, I am. Like, he acknowledges it. And when I use the word sadist, though, that's when he gets, he's like, oh, no, I'm not a sadist. I'm not.
Correct.
He gets very
Correct.
upset about that word anytime I've used it with him.
And do you know the reason why?
No.
Okay, here's the reason why. Because, first of all, we already know he's a sadist. He meets the description. He's sexualizing victims during the course of killing them and sexually molesting them after they're dead. I mean, it is a classical form of sadism, sexual sadism. But here's the reason why he doesn't want to see himself as a sadist. The reason why he doesn't want to see himself as a sadist means that he is mentally ill, that he suffers from some form of serious psychosexual problem. And he doesn't want to admit that he has one. In part, that's what he's proving to the victims while he's sexually assaulting them. It is about the power and control, but it's also about showing that he can obtain and maintain an erection. Because in reality, I'm going to tell you something that he hasn't told you, but I really do believe it's true. This guy has had sexual dysfunction problems in normalized relationships, whatever they were. Like for his girlfriend, I am sure that he had problems with sexual performance issues. And with females, and I'm singing to the choir, women can hide very easily during a sex act that they're not sexually aroused. Why? Because there's no physiological hallmarks. Right. For the man, if he's not sexually aroused, a blind woman is going to know it.
Yeah.
So we as men can't camouflage. Women can camouflage the fact they're not sexually aroused as completely as they normally would be under normal circumstances. So when men are attempting to perform sexually and can't, it is a humiliating experience for most men. One that's not pleasant at all, and one that goes back to and ties into their primal orientation and identification of them as a male. And it usually triggers, if they're not well integrated and well balanced, when the male is impotent and can't perform, instead of examining what's going on in me that's causing the impotence and causing the inability to perform, they blame the woman, which further triggers the reason for why they need to punish them for their inability to sexually perform.
That makes so much sense, too. You know what's strange, too, is the last time I went to San Quentin, it was, we had a great interview because he got it was emotional. Like, he was very actually emotional during everything. And it was like, it's so weird because it was like he started just saying stuff, like throwing it like almost like a baseball just at me. And he was like, what did he say? This was so weird. He said to me, he goes, because he had a lot of sexual encounters with men as well. And I always said to him, I go, what, are you bisexual? Are you?
What were you going to say?
I was going to ask that question. Let her finish.
Okay.
gay? And he was just like, no. And he said, you know, I've always just wanted to be loved and I wanted to be liked. And he goes, and I would do that even with a male if that's what it meant, you know.
Right. Well, what does that feed into? That feeds into his history of feeling rejected and a throwaway child.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's also, Laura, that's also the reason why there was a co-defendant involved.
Yeah.
Co-defendant wasn't just a happenstance co-defendant who participated in somehow in various ways in these commission of these murders. The co-defendant was there because of the sexual component of his inability to perform with women.
Right.
And I have no doubt that with his co-defendant, there was at some point in time some sexual exchange.
Interesting. So he's basically saying that, I mean, unpack that for me because I'm not sure I'm going to explain it right.
There's a lot to unpack there. Yeah. Well, he's pretty much saying, you know, this is him being the throwaway child. This goes into why he might have crossed, you know, gender lines with sexual acts, and the reason why he had a co-defendant. You know, there's somebody always to validate him, which is the underlying need that he is searching for. Is that underlying need to be liked, that underlying need of validation from another human being.
Hmm.
In a nutshell, yeah.
Because what I took a little bit away from that is that he had Norris there just in case he couldn't perform sexually.
That's what Dr. Pass was saying.
As like a backup.
I don't know if
And he would get, and maybe that would get him aroused watching Norris sexually assault the victim.
I think they both got sexually aroused watching each other assault the victim. I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it's really interesting what Dr. Pass has to say about why he does the things that he does, the primal, and also basically his wiring. It just sounds to me like his wiring was wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, his description about him not being wanted to be called a sadist, and it taps in, then that means that he'd have to admit that he has something mentally wrong with him.
Because it's a narcissistic point, correct? Like
he's
a narcissist. So he doesn't want to believe that as a narcissist, I would never be a sadist, but he is a sadist.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like,
so he's a narcissistic sadist. Fantastic.
Exactly. But the fact that how screwed up his mind is, he needs that in order to kind of get through the day, saying, well, you know, oh yeah, that guy's worse than me. You know, he probably walked around death row and he goes, oh, that guy's creepy. You know,
I mean, they all do that in some weird way. They all like look at each other and think that they're somehow better than one another.
Yeah,
you know, in the weirdest way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that was interesting because you've talked about that before, how they would be in these little cliques and how they would look down upon other killers as if they weren't on the same level or they were worse than them. Like, oh, I didn't do what they did. We did this, but we didn't do that. That's really bad, which I think is really interesting too.
Yeah. Like, we're the smart intellectual serial killers. That guy's just a dumb monster.
Right.
You know, he's just an animal. We're not animals.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Even though he's hanging out with Douglas Clark talking about
Tony Burns.
Don't insult
I know. It's crazy.
It's bizarre. Well, I think we need to get Dr. Pass on again.
Yeah.
I think, you know, because it's fascinating. I mean, you know, because obviously he's got years and years of experience. That you're so lucky to have someone like a mentor like that who can help you guide through it. I mean, because it's like sit there and it's like,
right,
you've been through it, and it's like the way he describes it, and it's so clear, and it just goes down to like basic human qualities that you have to kind of that you have to check off in order to get them to open up. And it's just like it's pretty fascinating, and it's just it literally is, you know, the definition of mind hunting. You know, it's like, you know, and it's like, and I think it's fascinating. I think audiences and listeners are fascinated. I mean, they're coming out with another season of Mindhunter. I'm really curious on what they're going to be doing on this route. You know, as far as I think they came all the way up until the 70s for the first incarnations, but I'm curious to see where they take it next. And I mean, you're doing it on a daily basis, this mine hunting. And
Yeah.
how does it feel like when you see, did you obviously saw the series, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you think about it based upon
Um,
all the stuff that you know?
it's funny because I probably watch it so different from everybody else in the world. Is I'm watching it is trying to see, the difference from how they were then versus now, of how far they've come, if they haven't progressed at all. So I'm kind of like looking at, because all the notes of these serial killers were from the 70s, of how they were in the 70s when they were interviewed. So I'm now reaching them 40 years later. So it's interesting to see how they were back then versus now, how different they are with me versus them, when they first went in back then.
All right, I'm sure you've been tracking this one, and everyone's saying, they all say, well, there's not as many serial killers now, and I think you disagree with that. I think right now there's in Austin, Texas, at Ladyburg Lake, they're finding bodies a lot.
We were there.
We were there like a year ago, and it actually is. I think it's up to 20 victims now in the Ladyburg Lake area, which we were actually supposed to go dive in for our show, and they, and I think just fortunate we didn't get a permit or something like that for that.
It was like the last minute we decided not to do it, and gratefully so, because the last thing our guy wanted to see was that.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's happening. They're out there.
Oh yeah, one of my girlfriends, she works forensics. She posted a meme or something she made or something, and it said, serial killers going extinct, and then posted these 4 were caught last week, and posted 4 that were around the country that were just caught. Yeah.
It's terrifying.
So they're everywhere. Yeah.
You have to be aware.
Even with people having phones and all this technology and cameras, I mean, there's still, they'll figure out a way.
Right. I mean, look how long it took to catch Long Island serial killer. I mean, he was active for over 20 years.
Easy.
And
Gary Ridgway, 30 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bittaker was fast, but a lot of them were not.
Exactly. Well, they got careless.
Yeah. That's what happens.
They get careless.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Laura, this was fascinating as always.
Yeah.
Gut-wrenching, but fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean,
a lot.
Horrifying, but yes, fascinating.
All right, so we're going to try, hopefully get Dr. Allan Pass on the talk, and also Dr. White. I think hearing all these scholars talk about this is fascinating, and kind of breaking down how these horrible individuals think. Don't know what we can do about it, because it's kind of like,
it's just awareness. Like if you're just aware, if there's signs when children
Right.
are suffering, or if they're suffering in silence, or if they're having behavioral issues. I mean, paying attention to the signs of children, I think, is the most important takeaway from this.
Yeah.
Well, and also paying attention to the adults, like people we've never met before.
Right.
You might be
who's
around, personality traits, what they do, and that can be kind of a warning sign.
All right. Thanks, Laura.